I'm a 29-year-old woman, and a couple of years ago I met the man who would become my husband in a way I didn't see coming. It happened at a mutual friend's engagement party, one of those big lively gatherings where everyone is either catching up, gossiping, or dancing in the corner after a few drinks. My sister Claire was there too. She and I are only 2 years apart, and while we've had our fair share of sibling rivalry, we've always kept things civil. At least I thought so back then. I was standing at the bar, trying to decide between ordering a cocktail or just sticking with wine, when this tall, sandy-haired guy came over. He had this easy smile, leaned on the counter, and asked me what I was drinking. I told him I hadn't made up my mind yet, and he recommended something I'd never tried before. The bartender slid it over, and we started talking like we'd known each other for years. I barely noticed how long we stood there until I saw Claire walking toward us. Claire slipped into the conversation without missing a beat, her tone light but her body language leaning a little too close to him. She laughed at everything he said, even the small jokes, brushing her hair back in that way she does when she's trying to draw attention. I thought it was a little odd, but I brushed it off. Claire can be flirty with everyone, and I wasn't about to read too much into it. After a while, Ethan, yes, that was his name, asked for my number. He did it right there in front of Claire. She smiled, but it was the kind of smile you give when you're forcing it. I gave him my number, and he left to grab another drink. Claire didn't say much afterward, just asked me casually how I knew him. I told her I'd just met him, and she nodded like it was nothing. A week later, Ethan and I went on our first date. It was one of those evenings where everything just flows. Conversation never stalled, we laughed a lot, and by the end of the night, I knew I wanted to see him again. We started seeing each other regularly after that, and things just clicked. That's when I noticed Claire asking about him more than usual. At first it seemed like harmless sisterly curiosity. What does he do for work? What are his hobbies? Is he seeing anyone else? But the questions kept coming, and there was this tone in her voice I couldn't quite place. A couple months into dating, Ethan met my parents at a small family dinner. Claire showed up dressed like she was going to a cocktail party instead of a casual night in. She made sure to sit next to Ethan and somehow kept steering the conversation toward herself. Anytime Ethan started telling a story, she'd jump in with her own, even if it was only vaguely related. After that night, I mentioned it to my friend Lena, who has known me and Claire for years. Lena didn't hesitate. She said it sounded like Claire might have a crush on Ethan. I laughed it off at first, but the thought stuck in the back of my mind. Not long after, Ethan brought it up himself. We were out for dinner when he told me, kind of hesitantly, that he got a strange vibe from Claire. Nothing major, but enough that he noticed. I told him I'd seen it too, but didn't think much would come of it. Then came the late-night text. It was almost midnight when Claire sent Ethan a video link, something silly from social media. That might have been fine if she'd done it before, but she never had. I wouldn't have even known, except Ethan handed me his phone to show me something else, and there it was. A few days later, I decided to confront her. She didn't even try to deny it. She told me, plain as day, that she'd always had a thing for Ethan since the night they met. She said she thought she could have made him happier than I could. I told her straight up that Ethan was off limits and that her comments were crossing a line. She just smiled, not a nice smile either, but one of those smug little smirks, and said, "We'll see." It was the kind of moment that makes your stomach drop, because you realize this isn't just harmless flirting. This was my sister making it clear she wasn't planning to back off. At the time, I had no idea just how far she was willing to push it. 2 years after we first met, Ethan and I went away for a long weekend in the mountains. The cabin had a wraparound deck that looked out over pine trees and a lake far below. On the second night, just before sunset, he took me outside. The air was cool, the sky was starting to turn orange, and he got down on one knee. There wasn't anyone else around, just the sound of the wind in the trees. I said yes, and by the time we came back inside, I had a ring on my finger and 100 texts to send. When we got home, the engagement news spread quickly. Our parents wanted a dinner, friends started sending flowers, and my phone didn't stop buzzing. Claire called, her voice flat. She congratulated us but skipped over any excitement. At the small family get-together that followed, she hugged Ethan, held on just a moment too long, then stepped back without even looking at me. A week later, she gave us an engagement gift. It was framed, wrapped neatly in gold paper. Inside was a photo from the night Ethan and I met, taken by a friend at the bar. In this version, the image had been cropped so only Ethan was in the frame. No background, no me, just him. Ethan looked at it, eyebrows lifting, but set it aside without comment. That night, when it was just us, he mentioned how strange her behavior had been lately. He listed off the little things, lingering glances, overly personal questions, and ended with the cropped photo. I didn't disagree. Not long after, I overheard her talking to our cousin Zoe in the kitchen during a Sunday lunch. She told Zoe that Ethan wasn't the marrying type and might still change his mind. She said it like she was giving friendly advice, but it was timed so perfectly before the wedding planning that it was hard not to connect the dots. At another family dinner, she went after his career. We were all seated around the table when she asked how his job was going, then added a comment about how she didn't know how he could be satisfied without chasing something bigger. Ethan didn't bristle. He explained that he liked his work, valued having a balance, and didn't need to constantly be climbing to be happy. She smiled and told him she admired his ability to settle for less. The wedding planning started to ramp up. Against my better judgment, I named her maid of honor. It wasn't because I wanted her in that spot, it was to avoid months of family drama. She acted surprised when I told her, then immediately started asking about bachelorette plans. Her idea of a destination caught my attention. She picked a city Ethan had once mentioned he wanted to visit, a place known for its nightlife. She insisted it would be perfect, so I let her run with it. When the weekend came, we arrived at a rented condo with a view of the skyline. The first night was low-key, dinner and some drinks with the group. Around midnight, while I was sitting on the couch watching a movie with two friends, Ethan's name lit up my phone. He asked if I was okay. Confused, I told him I was fine. That's when he explained Claire had just called him, sounding frantic, saying I was too drunk and flirting with strangers. I walked to the kitchen and found Claire pouring another glass of wine. I asked her why she told Ethan that story. She shrugged and said it was just a joke, nothing to take seriously. The next morning, she acted like it had never happened. When we got back home, I told her plainly that I wouldn't tolerate any more attempts to interfere with my relationship. She smirked, the same way she had that first time, and said I was too sensitive and could do better anyway. By then, I knew she wasn't going to stop on her own. The morning of the wedding started early. The bridal suite was full of dresses hanging on racks, curling irons heating up, and the smell of coffee mixed with hairspray. Claire was there before the hairstylist even unpacked, sitting off to the side with her phone in her hand. She barely looked up except to scroll or type. When the makeup artist texted to say she'd be a little late because of traffic, Claire stood up and said she could help in the meantime. She pulled me into the chair, dug through a bag, and started working on my face. She chose a lipstick far darker than anything I'd picked out and ran eyeliner under my lower lashes until it smudged. She called it more dramatic. I excused myself to fix it before the photographer arrived. While I was getting my hair done, the photographer leaned over and mentioned something odd. Apparently, Claire had pulled him aside and suggested they take a few shots of Ethan alone, before the ceremony, with no one else around. He thought it was unusual and politely declined since he was following the schedule I'd given him. Downstairs, the groomsmen were getting ready. Later, one of them told me he'd overheard Claire telling Ethan he looked too handsome to be tied down so soon. She'd laughed after, but it had been said in that way that sticks. The ceremony started, and I was waiting for my cue to walk. My bouquet was missing. I turned and saw Claire chatting with a bridesmaid in the corner, bouquet still in her hand. Someone nudged her, and she handed it over just as the music was starting, leaving me with an awkward pause before stepping forward. During the vows, the officiant was speaking when Claire stepped between us to adjust Ethan's boutonniere. Ethan's jaw tightened, and his eyes cut toward her before she stepped back into place. At the reception, she stood for her maid of honor speech. The first few lines were fine, but then she started talking about the night she first connected with Ethan, weaving in little details from that engagement party. A few guests glanced at each other. More than once, she described him in a way that sounded more like an admirer than a sister-in-law. Throughout the night, guests came up to me and mentioned the speech. Some tried to keep it light, saying it was unusual, but a few admitted it had been uncomfortable to watch. When the DJ announced our first dance, Ethan and I made it to the middle of the floor. A few bars into the song, Claire cut in, laughing, and pulled Ethan away for just a second. The crowd looked on as the moment broke apart. I caught her alone by the side of the dance floor and told her to stop making a spectacle. She waved it off, saying she was having fun and I was overreacting. Later, I went to grab a drink and passed the hallway near the restrooms. Claire's voice carried over the music. She was telling Ethan that if he ever wanted to talk about what he was missing, he knew where to find her. That was the moment everything shifted. I decided I was done letting her slip by with these stunts. I started thinking about exactly how to make sure she understood she couldn't keep crossing that line. I went back to the reception smiling, greeting guests, making small talk as if nothing had happened. Ethan caught my eye from across the room and gave a small nod, the kind that said he knew I had heard. Later, he leaned over and told me he'd back me in whatever I chose to do. By the end of the night, while the last songs played and people lingered near the dessert table, I had already put the first quiet pieces of my plan into place. After the wedding, I kept my distance from Claire. For 2 weeks, I answered only when it was necessary. No extra texts, no casual calls. When she stopped by my parents' house one afternoon while I was there, I left within 15 minutes. I knew ignoring her wasn't enough, but it was the first step in setting the tone. Then my mom called about a Sunday dinner. Both of us were invited, along with some cousins who were in town. I agreed right away, already knowing it would be the perfect setup. On the day, Ethan and I got there early. I headed straight to the dining room and switched the place cards my mom had set out. The seat beside Ethan, the one Claire always made sure to grab, now had Zoe's name on it. I took the chair on his other side. By the time Claire arrived, the table was already full except for a seat across from us. Once everyone sat down, I kept the conversation moving toward Zoe. She had just been promoted, and I made sure everyone heard about the details, her big client project, her upcoming trip to speak at a conference. Claire glanced over but said nothing, pushing her salad around the plate. Halfway through the meal, I brought up a memory from our honeymoon planning, how Ethan had tried cooking a dish from the country we'd visited before booking. He laughed and added a detail about burning the first attempt. Everyone at the table was smiling, except Claire, who stayed silent. Later, she tried to steer the conversation toward a trip Ethan had once mentioned wanting to take. She described the destination, making it sound casual, like she was throwing out an idea. Ethan didn't hesitate. He told her we'd already booked that trip for our anniversary. Claire suggested maybe we should make it a group trip. I set my fork down and told her we wanted it to be just the two of us. She looked at me, then dropped her gaze back to her plate. I wore a necklace that night, thin gold chain with a small charm, that Ethan had given me last year. I knew she had once admired it, and asked where it came from. When someone complimented it, I smiled and said it was from Ethan, and that he'd surprised me with it out of the blue. As dessert came out, I mentioned that Ethan had another surprise planned for me soon. I didn't say what it was, only that I was excited. While showing Zoe a few photos on my phone, I made sure to scroll just far enough for Claire to catch a glimpse of affectionate text from Ethan. I didn't linger, just moved on to the next picture like nothing had happened. By the last course, Claire was quieter than she'd been all evening. She answered questions but didn't start new conversations. When the plates were cleared, I thanked my parents for dinner, stood up, and told everyone we were heading out. Claire looked like she was about to say something but didn't. Later that night, Zoe texted me that Claire had been unusually short-tempered after we left, barely speaking to anyone. That was all I needed to know that phase 1 was working. She was off balance, and she didn't even realize the rest was coming. I decided the next step needed to involve people outside the family, mutual friends, the kind who would notice small shifts in behavior and remember them. So I planned a casual gathering at our place. Nothing fancy, just good food, music, and a mix of people from different parts of our lives. I made sure to invite friends Claire hadn't seen in months, along with a few who'd heard bits and pieces of her antics over the years. When the night came, the living room was already full by the time Claire arrived. Conversations were going in every corner, laughter spilling from the kitchen, and music playing softly in the background. The mix meant there was no single center of attention, no empty stage for her to step onto. I kept the group conversations focused on recent milestones, trips, and events Claire hadn't been part of. One friend talked about their new house, another about getting engaged, someone else about a big job promotion. I made sure to ask questions and keep the topics moving so that the spotlight stayed anywhere but on her. A friend with a camera wandered through the crowd, taking candid shots. He caught moments of Ethan and me laughing in the kitchen, clinking glasses with friends on the patio, and sitting close together on the couch. They weren't posed, just small slices of the night that spoke for themselves. Claire walked in wearing a sleek dress and styled hair, clearly aiming for an entrance. She smiled, said her greetings, but it was clear from the way the conversations barely paused that the group's attention was already elsewhere. As people moved between rooms, several guests complimented the house, the new paint in the dining room, the way we'd set up the patio lighting. Each comment reinforced my role as host, the one bringing everyone together. At one point, the conversation turned to past trips. I shared a few funny moments from a vacation Ethan and I had taken last year, choosing ones that were light but full of inside jokes between us. I didn't mention Claire once. Later, Rachel arrived. She was a friend who Claire had once tried to distance from me by spreading small rumors. We hadn't spoken much in a while, but I'd made the effort to invite her. She seemed genuinely glad to be there, and we picked up our conversation easily. Ethan joined in, complimenting her recent work project. Rachel thanked me for introducing them in the first place, which drew a few approving nods from others nearby. Claire, from her seat on the arm of a chair across the room, made a pointed comment about how quickly Ethan and I had gotten serious. No one picked it up, and the conversation moved on without her. Dinner was served buffet style, but I made sure Ethan's favorite dish, something Claire had once claimed she made best, was front and center. When Ethan took a bite, he told everyone how much he loved my version. A few people asked for the recipe. As we moved outside to the patio, I mentioned how Ethan had helped string the lights and set up the seating area. It was small, but it showed the kind of partnership we had without me needing to spell it out. By mid-evening, Claire had retreated to the edge of the group. She chatted with one or two people at a time, but didn't make any real effort to join the main conversations. After the last guests left, messages started coming in. People thanked me for hosting, told me how much they'd enjoyed the night, and suggested doing it again soon. Not one person mentioned Claire. Watching how easily she faded into the background told me phase 2 was doing exactly what it was supposed to. Her place in our shared social circle was slipping, and she didn't even realize how fast it was happening. About a month after the gathering at our house, Rachel reached out. She mentioned that Claire was applying for a position at her company. It wasn't just any role. One of Ethan's close friends, Mark, was a manager there. That immediately caught my attention. I brought it up to Ethan later that night. He told me the company had a solid reputation and was known for being selective. Their team culture was built around collaboration, and they avoided hiring people who might cause friction. I suggested, casually, that he give Mark a heads up. Not in a way that would block Claire for no reason, but enough to make sure he understood what could come with hiring her. Ethan agreed, and when he spoke to Mark, he kept it factual. He explained some of what had happened at the wedding, the inappropriate speech, the interruptions during the ceremony, the unnecessary drama, without exaggerating. Mark listened and then told him their hiring priority was to bring in people who were drama-free and team-focused. Meanwhile, Claire was radiating confidence. She mentioned to me in passing that she was a shoo-in for the job because she knew someone on the team. She didn't say who, but it was clear she thought her connection was enough to secure the offer. On the morning of her interview, she was dressed in a tailored suit and left early. Later that day, Ethan got a message from Mark. He said Claire had done fine in the technical part, her answers were solid, and she seemed prepared. But then came the problem. After the panel wrapped up, there was a casual coffee break with a few staff members. During that time, Claire made a flirty remark to one of the senior managers, the kind that made the conversation go silent for a second. Mark said it wasn't outright offensive, but it was inappropriate in a professional setting, and the panelists all noticed. A week later, the decision came through. Claire got a polite rejection email. No explanation, just the standard we've decided to move forward with other candidates. She called me not long after, venting about how unfair hiring politics could be and how companies didn't value personality anymore. I listened, gave neutral responses, and didn't let on that I already knew exactly why she hadn't been hired. At dinner a few days later, I brought up Ethan's career and how much his professionalism and teamwork had contributed to his success. I made the comment while others were at the table, letting it land without directing it at anyone. Claire muttered something under her breath about lucky people, but didn't elaborate. Ethan, picking up on the moment, added that my own work ethic was one of the things he admired most. He didn't look in her direction, but the contrast was clear enough for anyone listening. By then, I knew phase 3 was locked in. Losing that opportunity wasn't something she could spin into a win, and it would be a reminder she'd carry for a long time. The news came from my mom over coffee. Claire was hosting a big summer dinner party for family and close friends. She'd been talking it up for weeks, calling it her signature event of the year. That was all I needed to hear to know this would be the perfect moment to end things on my terms. I accepted the invitation the same day, my tone warm and easy. I thanked her like she'd just offered me front row seats to a show. Any tension from the past few months seemed to melt from her replies. That was the point. If she thought the ice had thawed, she wouldn't be on guard. The next step was lining up my quiet allies. I reached out to Zoe, Rachel, and a few others in our shared circle. Each got a casual heads up about the night and a small ask. Keep conversations moving in ways that didn't give Claire the spotlight, and if the opportunity came up, drop in the kind of topics that would make comparisons unavoidable without being direct. Everyone agreed. Ethan got his part too. Be warm, be polite. But the second Claire tried to pull him into a one-on-one, disengage with an excuse and move back toward me or the group, he didn't need convincing. When the evening came, we arrived right on time. I wore a new dress Ethan had picked out, one of those fits like it was made for you kinds, paired with simple jewelry. The compliments started the second I walked through the door. Zoe pointing out the color, Rachel asking where I'd found it, even one of Claire's friends commenting on how well it suited me. Inside, the table was set beautifully, candles flickering against the summer twilight. Claire was moving between the kitchen and the living room, greeting guests, clearly proud of her setup. Before she could launch into anything about herself, I started working the room. I asked every guest about what they'd been up to, promotions, vacations, new projects. Each answer pulled attention away from her and kept it moving. Midway through dinner, Ethan dropped the first planned moment. While everyone was talking about travel, he mentioned our anniversary trip, the same one Claire had once tried to invite herself on, casually adding that we'd upgraded to a luxury suite. It got a round of impressed reactions from the table. Zoe, right on cue, turned to Claire and asked if she had any big plans coming up. Claire paused, then gave a vague answer about just working for now, before the conversation moved on without her. After the main course, I presented her with a host gift. It was small, neatly wrapped. Inside was a framed group photo from our wedding. Ethan and I in sharp focus at the center, smiling, and Claire in the background, slightly out of focus but clearly there. I thanked her for hosting and handed it over in front of a few guests. She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. Later, while everyone was still lingering over drinks, Rachel started telling a story about a friend whose sibling had tried to interfere in their relationship. She didn't name anyone, didn't even say it was recent, but at certain moments her eyes flicked toward me. The implication was clear enough for anyone paying attention. By then, I could see Claire's posture shift. She started fidgeting with her glass, sipping faster, glancing toward the kitchen as if looking for an out. Dessert was served, and before the evening wound down, I made my exit. I thanked her for the night, complimented her on the food and the setup, and left with Ethan while people were still mid-conversation. The party kept going without us. In the weeks after, the change was obvious. At family gatherings, Claire spoke less, avoided sitting near Ethan, and mostly kept to safe, surface-level topics. Invitations from our mutual friends started showing up, addressed only to me and Ethan, without her name anywhere on them. I never brought it up, never rubbed it in. I didn't need to. The combination of being edged out socially, the quiet public contrasts, and the reminder of her place had landed exactly as intended. Without a single argument or raised voice, she knew exactly what crossing that line had cost her, and it was a cost she'd carry for a long time.